Hey, so I want to just say welcome to those that are online too. Man, we are grateful. I'm sorry, you're right here. Yeah, we usually have a camera back there, but we've had technical difficulties. And I just want to, can we give our tech team a hand, right? And then between the ones back there and others that make things happen, you know, we do have a sizable number of people that tune in on a weekly basis or catch the sermon up afterwards, and it's only possible because of people that serve. And so we thank you for that, and we appreciate that. And just one more announcement is that if you've been coming to the Avenue Church, you've been checking it out, and you're thinking that you might be interested in membership here at the church, we have a new members class next week. It's during our second service. We provide lunch afterwards. And if you're just interested to find out more about how the church operates and what it means to be a member, we invite you to take that class next Sunday. You could come to the first service and then in the second service participate in that class. And it's just an informational time. It doesn't walk you into membership or anything, but it gives you all the information to know about if that's maybe part of your next steps in your faith journey. So we're excited about that. Super excited for today's message. We are continuing our study through the book of Daniel. Now, last week we started into the section of Daniel, chapters 7 through 12, that is the apocalyptic section, right? Which that's a scary word. Ooh, apocalypse. And so we're gonna study a few scary things today because Daniel has a vision of 4 really scary beasts that come up out of the sea. We're going to look into that. Last week, we really studied the center part of chapter 7, which is the main part, which is the most important part. It's about the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man who's going to rule for all of eternity. And so we studied that last week. And if you missed that, go on YouTube and catch up, because that's really the basis. That's the key thing. But we're not going to skip over any of these things. We're going to lean into and study them. And just so you know, if you're not part of that Journey texting group, we use that throughout the week to kind of give further questions and ideas. And we're going to send out some additional study notes and resources through that this week if you're interested in connecting with that. All right, well, let's just dive in. Daniel chapter 7. We're not going to read the whole chapter. We're going to read some selections. And so Daniel 7 verse 1 starts out in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another, like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots, and behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Then if we skip down into verse 15, As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. We're going to stop there and come back and finish the chapter here in just a little bit. But let's just kind of get a sense of this vision, right? He sees the Great Sea, which most commentators believe it's the Mediterranean Sea, which these nations were around. And it says the winds of heaven had caused it to be tumultuous, and so it was this raging sea. And that might not just conjure up a lot of feelings for us, but in that culture, in the ancient Eastern culture, the sea was the place of like chaos. The sea was the place of the unknown and of danger. And there's this great study by the Bible Project that they put out doing a theme study of the chaos waters in the Bible. And so if you're interested in that, there's a link in the YouVersion notes for this sermon that I'd encourage you to go and study that further. But so we see this sense of out of chaos, out of this disorder, these four beasts come upon the scene. And so there's these animal creatures. They're kind of a combination of animals, right? So it's not just one animal, but it's like a lion with eagle's wings. And it's like a bear. And it's like a leopard. So it's not exactly, but it's similarities. And then the fourth beast, Daniel can't even have an analogy, right? He's like, I don't even know what to compare this fourth thing is. It's just exceedingly dreadful. Like, it is terrifying, and it's going beyond description, really. I've seen some people that have visually depicted these four beasts, and obviously the first three are these combinations of animals, and then the fourth one, they just put a Tyrannosaurus Rex with 10 horns on it. Like, let's just go with the T-Rex, right? Why not, right? Because would Daniel have known what a T-Rex is? So it's like, Pastor Ken, was it a T-Rex? I have no idea, right? I just had no absolute idea. So it's this visual, right? And we are challenged to think about these. What do these animals symbolize? Even in our current modern age, oftentimes nations will pick a predator to symbolize their nation, right? Like the United States, the bald eagle. Russia has often been symbolized by a bear, right? One of the founding fathers had suggested a turkey to symbolize the United States. I'm really glad we didn't go with that one, just to be honest. That would have been, I don't know, that just wouldn't be so awe-inspiring. But so it's obvious, right? We can see these are descriptive and symbolic, but what does it mean for us? And so I really want to lean into this, and I want to be upfront. You'll probably leave with more questions than you came with, okay? And I want to encourage you that we are in a kind of a long-term study. This is going to give you a snapshot of everything that you need to know about apocalypse in the Bible, okay? We are studying part of chapter 7. There's still 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of Daniel. And we're looking at these passages in conjunction with the book of Revelation at the end of the New Testament to try to gain a sense of what is God revealing to his people that he wants us to know. And so, again, this is a long-term thing. We encourage you to stick with us and keep studying, and we're gonna have questions, we're going to seek some answers, and it's okay if we don't know what all of these things mean right now. In fact, it's probably okay if we don't know what all these things mean at the very end, because even Daniel was pretty shocked and amazed and confused and alarmed by these visions. So let's just get into it and talk about these four beasts. And really, to do justice, I want to look back in the book of Daniel, because Daniel's vision in chapter 7 is very, very similar to a vision that he interpreted for King Nebuchadnezzar all the way back in Daniel chapter 2. So let's just hit some highlights of that vision as it pertains to Daniel's vision. In Daniel chapter 2, in verse 37, Daniel says, "You, O King of Kings, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold." And so Nebuchadnezzar envisioned a statue, an image, and it had a head of gold, and it had a chest of silver, and it had a midsection of bronze, and then it had legs of iron, and then feet and toes that were iron mixed with clay. So that was the vision that Nebuchadnezzar has. And Daniel explains to him what this vision means. He says, "You're the head of gold." And then in verse 39, "Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And it goes on and goes on, but in verse 44 it says, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. And that's really important. We're going to come back to that. And then it says in verse 45, you saw a stone that was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. And so I want to look at these two visions kind of side by side, right? We have a head of gold, and we have a lion with eagle's wings. Those are kind of the first things. And I believe that these are the same things. These are both referring to Babylon. They're both referring to the kingdom of Babylon. It's the head of gold and the lion and eagle. And as we think about like just the visual of a lion, right? We don't have to have a tremendous imagination to understand, right? We can actually see pictures. This is a mosaic of tile that was lining the main street in Babylon, okay? Where King Nebuchadnezzar was. Like, that is not made up. That actually lined the street. A lion was a very common motif that symbolized the royalty of the Babylonian Empire. In fact, in 1876, archaeologists dug up this following statue. It is the statue of a lion, and it dates from the time of King Nebuchadnezzar. And again, this was just discovered about 140 years ago, that they discovered, oh wow, this is a big deal. Like, lion represented royalty in King Nebuchadnezzar. And then there's this third image, and this is something, if you wanted to travel and go to the British Museum, you could see the winged lion. And again, archaeologists discovered this. This was, let me find, I'll watch the name, right? This was a winged lion that guarded the palace of Ashur-nasirapol II, right? And in the region of northern Iraq, which was the Babylonian Empire. And that's literally a lion with the wings of an eagle. And so, Daniel's like, duh, Babylon, I'm living it. He's in the reign of King Belshazzar, who was the last Babylonian ruler. And as we learned in, I think, Daniel chapter 5 or 6, I forget the chapter numbers, but anyways, that night, right, the writing on the wall, Belshazzar was killed, the Medes and the Persians now took over. And so again, Daniel got to see all of, at least this initial part, happen with his very own eyes. One other thing of note before moving on, right? In Daniel 7:4, it says that this lion with eagle's wings, its wings were plucked off. Like these symbols of royal splendor were taken away. And we remember, right, as from the story of Nebuchadnezzar, he actually lost his sanity. He was driven from among men. He lost all of his nobility and his royalty and his splendor, and he was made to eat grass like an ox, and he was wet with the dew of heaven. Until a time that his sanity was restored, and then he received the kingdom back with all the glory that he had before, and he regained his sanity. And we see that that's in Daniel chapter 4. And again, the vision that Daniel has of this lion has its wings plucked off, but then it's lifted up on its feet, and it's given what? The mind of a man. So again, very clear connections to what we actually have seen happen in the Babylonian Empire. And so that's the first beast, and that's the head of gold. And then if we continue on to the second beast, it is this bear that's raised up on one side, and it has 3 ribs in its mouth. And very interesting, right, this concept. And I would believe that this would pertain to the Medo-Persian kingdom that followed Babylon, right? And we read about that in Scripture. The history books tell us that is what happened. And again, the visual that this is raised up on one side kind of denotes like one side being superior or in authority and power over the other. And we know that the Persian Empire was much greater, even though it was like the Medes and the Persians, but the Persians really ruled it. We're going to see next week in chapter 8, the second and the third beasts of Daniel 7 are also talked about in these two different visions, or beasts in Daniel 8. And one of them has a horn taller and bigger than the other horn. And again, all of these things that really make us think, like, this is all similar. This is all seeming to say the same thing in different visions. And so we would believe that that's the Medo-Persian Empire. The three ribs in the mouth, some Bible scholars say that's not really important details. It's just it just devours other kingdoms and destroys them. Others look at it and say, well, the Medo-Persian Empire had three main military conquests. Had Babylon, had Egypt, and Lydia. And those were the three major military conquests that kingdom had, and that's what could be represented by those three ribs. And so, moving on to the third beast, this leopard that has 4 wings on its back. And so there's some significance there. The leopard is an incredibly fast and agile animal. And then when we think about 4 wings, not just, a pair of wings, but 2 pairs of wings, we think about this extreme speed and agility that this beast or this animal would be represented to have. And as we look at history, and as we look at the progression of these kingdoms that happened throughout history, we find the kingdom of Greece. And we find that there is, in the history of the world, there's been an unparalleled speed at which Alexander the Great conquered the entire known world by the time he was 28 years old. Right? And the history books the myths say, that he lamented that there was nothing else to conquer. That what else is there in life? I've already conquered the known world, essentially. And he died very young without an heir to his kingdom, to his empire. And so history tells us that eventually the Greek Empire was distributed to 4 of his generals. And as we look at this beast, Daniel 7 says it had 4 heads. So again, very interesting as we relate it to the empire of Greek. The Greek Empire ended up with 4 generals taking over that empire. And so we're going to talk more about these 2 next week and the weeks to come when we really study Daniel chapter 8. So really want to move on and talk about the 4th beast, because we find that this is really what Daniel was most interested in. Right? So as we go back to our text in Daniel chapter 7, we scroll back up and we'll read starting in verse 19. Daniel, again, in his vision, he goes to an angelic being that is there with him, and he says, I desired to know the truth about the 4th beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet, and about the 10 horns that were on its head, that the other horn came up, and before which 3 of them fell. The horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. And as I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came. And judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, and times, and half a time. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed but I kept the matter in my heart. So let me tell you, it's okay if your thoughts alarm you a little bit. They did Daniel, but again, we want to receive some comfort and instruction from this text and get a sense. And again, I'm encouraging you, right? Keep an open mind. We haven't studied all the things that we're going to study about these visions and the little horn and the different dynamics of this. But I believe that as we look at this fourth beast, this fourth kingdom, is really best represented and understood in the sense of being Rome. Okay? And there are some disagreements, right, as we look at the four beasts and Christian understanding of what these things mean over the millennia, right? Since the thousands of years that Christians have been studying these texts in relation to what we read in the New Testament, what we read in the book of Revelation. And there's some variety of opinions, right, on exactly what these things mean. But I believe, and I sense that this is Rome, that it's the legs of iron in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, and it is the fourth beast in Daniel's vision. You know, again, as we think about the Roman Empire, it was the largest and the most enduring, while these other empires kind of ruled and reigned, that they came to an end, right? They were conquered themselves. But this fourth beast was different. The Roman Empire, right? You can't look at history and say, well, who came in and conquered the Romans? Well, that kind of didn't really happen. The Roman Empire, it spread and it lasted. Now, it kind of morphed and changed over time. And as we think back to Daniel chapter 2, it talks about, there was partly clay and partly iron, and some parts were strong and other parts were weak, and they tried to be strong by intermarriage. And you could go through history and kind of try to get a sense of maybe how that happened throughout the centuries, right? And after the first century, when Rome still kind of controlled things, but it just eventually dissipated into a bunch of other nations. And so again, there's different viewpoints on this. And so again, I want to encourage you to have an open-handed approach to say, well, does that make the most sense in light of everything that I read in Scripture? And we're going to continue to refine that over time. But there's a pretty unmistakable correspondence, right? When it's talking about the description that this kingdom is different, right? And this kingdom went and it's had great iron teeth, just like in the statue with iron legs. And it devoured and destroyed and it trampled. And we know that, in history, right, there was what was called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, which essentially they brought peace to the world because essentially, hey, either you go with us or we stomp you out. And that was essentially how the Roman Empire ruled. It's hey, you will have peace if you bow, and if you follow along, and if not, we will conquer you and destroy you and stamp out your existence. And otherwise, you can have peace with us. And that's essentially how the Roman Empire ruled. And so again, we have these correlations between Daniel chapter 4 and the iron and the clay and all these different things. And so I want to also now look beyond the book of Daniel, and I want to look at some comparisons to what we read in Revelation chapter 13. Because I think as we read this, we're going to say, wait a minute, I've seen some of these things before. This isn't new. These are some very familiar ideas from what we just read. So if we were to just open up Revelation chapter 13, verse 1, we see John having this vision, and he says, I saw a beast rising out of the sea. It's a pretty familiar vision. And here it says it has 10 horns. We've seen this before with 10 horns. This is familiar. And 7 heads. Now that's a little different. Okay. Put a pin in that, right? That could mean something interesting, and we're not going to talk about it today. And then it says with 10 diadems or crowns on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw, let's listen to the description. It was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. So here we have a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns, and some differences, right? some uniqueness, but also some things that are very common to what we've seen. And then this one beast really kind of is like the combination, essentially, of all four beasts that Daniel tells us in chapter 7, right? It was like a leopard, it had the feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion. And those are the three main qualities or descriptions of the first three beasts in Daniel's dream. And then having the 10 horns is very much a connection, right? As we think about these things and contemplate, man, there's some connections going on here. And really, that's my goal, is to help us lean into, not to be able to have a concrete definition today of all these different things, but to help us understand, like, okay, the Bible is this connected book, right? And so to really read and understand Revelation apart from Daniel would be just to look at part of the whole. Or to read and understand Daniel without also considering and contemplating what we read in Revelation is also not really availing ourselves to the whole of what God is trying to reveal to us. And so, again, we're gonna talk more about this as we go through, and we're gonna build a better understanding, I hope, right, for us to be able to say, what is the totality of Scripture trying to reveal to us about these future events, and what of these events may be in the past, and what of these events may still be in the future, and in the end, how is it all working together to help us love God and others even more? And so, there's another similarity in Revelation 13 of this beast. In verse 7, it says, "It was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation." And in Daniel chapter 7, verse 21, we read that this little horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. So again, we're challenged to say, hey, these are very similar visions. These are very similar. There's some uniqueness, but there's a lot in common. And so it helps us as we're trying to understand Daniel, to have this sense that, okay, what John saw and what Daniel saw are very much related, very much connected. These are not just random, separate things. God is revealing very similar truths to both of these men, separated by hundreds and hundreds of years. So, another thing this is really the last thing that we're going to kind of draw out from our passage today, that there's a timeline, there's a very specific period of time that gets introduced in Daniel chapter 7. You see in verse 25, talking about this little horn, it says, "He shall speak words against the Most High, shall wear out the saints of the Most High, shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time." So you might think that's a really weird way to just put out a time period, right? Time, times, and half a time. And what Bible scholars really, when we look at that, we can understand there's a method, right? That they're saying that time is one, times is plural, that's two, and then half a time. So you take all of that together, it's 3.5 times, right? 3.5 periods of time, which you could anticipate would be a year. And when we look at the book of Daniel, especially the last half, right? 7 through 12, the apocalyptic section. And we look at the book of Revelation, we see that when we look at those things together, this same period of 3.5 in a period of time is mentioned on 10 different occasions. 10 different times through these two books, this time frame comes up, right? We read Daniel 7. Also in Daniel chapter 9, there's a prophecy that's known as the prophecy of the weeks. And the general consensus for a lot of Bible scholars is that a week refers to a set of 7 years, right? A week is 7. And then we're going to study Daniel chapter 9. We're not going to try to get into it today. But in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, it says that he will make a strong covenant with many for a week, and then for half of the week. he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. So for a period of what I would understand that to be 3.5 years, here there's that time period again. Something's going to happen in 3.5 years. And then when we see in Daniel chapter 12, verse 7, it says that Daniel sees a man clothed in linen who is above the waters. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, and times, and half a time. And that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. And so again, it's a reference to a 3.5-year period, something to do with the shattering of the power of the holy people coming to an end. Okay, so again, there's some really fascinating things here. When we get into the book of Revelation, we see this vision of a woman representing something, right? That was given 2 wings of the great eagle that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, and times, and half a time. Here again, we see the time period of 3.5 years given to us, okay? Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, it says, from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Now, just to understand, at that point in history, they used a lunar calendar, which is essentially 30 days. So a month had 30 days, because they went by the phases of the moon. And so, if a month has 30 days, then 1,260 days is exactly 3.5 years, and here they mention 1,290 days, which is exactly 3.5 years plus 1 month. And then he goes on to say, blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days, which is another month and a half added to that time, right? So now, those aren't exactly 3.5 years, but that's an approximate, right? And so there's some significance there, and we're not in Daniel chapter 12 yet, so we're not studying that yet. I'm just bringing up the point that it's very clear throughout Scripture, and then numerous other times in Daniel and Revelation, it lists this time period of either exactly 1,260 days, or exactly 42 months, or 3.5 years. And so there's significance there. And I'm not trying to build all the different viewpoints on what exactly those mean today. I'm just kind of raising the awareness for us that, wow, Daniel chapter 7 is introducing that this time period of 3.5 is significant, and we need to be paying attention. We need to be thinking about what these things can mean. Right? And so again, we're gonna continue in chapter 8 next week. We're going to continue to look at these visions and what they mean, look at the time frame, look at what's the most practical, what makes the most sense as to what things may have already been fulfilled in what we've read, and what things seem to be still yet to be fulfilled in the things that have been revealed to God's people throughout the years. But as our worship team comes up, I want to draw our attention back to exactly what the angel drew Daniel's attention back to. Right? Is that there's all this information that we've been given to be thoughtful, to meditate on, and to look at how God is working in the world around us. But the main thrust is, again, what the angel emphasizes to Daniel again and again. That the kingdom, and verse 27, the kingdom, the dominion, the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. And his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. That, again, like Daniel, like when we read these things, we might be alarmed in our minds and say, I don't know what is going on with this. This might be scary. It might be a little unnerving. But I want to encourage you with what the angel encouraged Daniel with. Hey, we know how it ends. We know how it pans out in the end. And by far the most important application that any of us can take away from this today is to know, am I on the right side of how this works out? am I among those that the angel says the kingdom will be given to the saints of the Most High God? Am I among that number? Do I know that I have trusted in Jesus for my salvation? That I recognize that he is the Messiah, the anointed one, right? The Son of Man that we talked about last week. That Jesus is what was referenced in Nebuchadnezzar's vision. That there is a kingdom, but by no human means, that will crush and destroy every other human kingdom and will last forever. That Jesus is that kingdom that God set up, right? During the reign of those kings that followed those kingdoms that were represented. During that time, Daniel 2 says God will set up a kingdom that will never end. Am I part of that kingdom? Have I acknowledged that Jesus is king over my life? That he is the ruler of me, and I've trusted in him for the salvation of my soul. So if that's not you today, that's your next step. Would you have faith to trust in Jesus? To give your life to him and to follow him? Man, I pray that today would be a day that you can know that your eternity is set. No matter what kind of crazy things happen in the world between now and then, that in the end, you are the right side of this. And then second application point, I think for all of us, right? I want to remind you, we have this little display in the back with these ping pong balls. And the white ping pong balls represent the name of someone that you would write on that ball that says, this person does not trust in Jesus. I don't think this person has a relationship with God. That if all this stuff were to pan out right now, I don't know that they'd end up on the right side of how all this ends. Would you commit yourself to pray for them? That's what that white ball represents, and you just place it in that little display back there. Maybe that's something that God leads you to do, to just take action and say, I'm going to commit myself to pray. And then when you have a gospel conversation with them, right, that just opens up, hey man, I believe that there's stuff, right? The Bible has given us information of things of how this world ends, and it matters, right? That we're right with God. And maybe you bring that conversation up, and that's one of those little green balls, right? You're planting the seed of the gospel. And so I want to encourage you, man, whatever God is leading you to do as the next step today, would we be faithful and obedient to follow in his leading? God, would you work in us today? Would you move us by your Spirit, not out of fear because of these crazy things that are going to happen in the world, but God, in trust, in faith, and obedience, because we know the Ancient of Days. We know the Son of Man who sits at the right hand of God the Father in victory and in triumph. And we know how it all ends, and we want to be on your side. We want to give ourselves to you. We want to be people of your kingdom. So God, move in us, work in us as only you can. We give you the glory and the praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you stand with us?